He asked me to go on a date to the Minnesota Wild game, and we hit it off, and since then we've been kind of inseparable.
Just about every month we go on at least 2 dates. She picks one and I pick one.
One of the things on our bucket list was both of us wanted to go skydiving. He jumped out of the plane first, so we're going up, and he was the first one out of the plane, and then it was me. And so I got down and landed pretty hard, actually, and then he got down on one knee, and it was all on video, all on film. And
I proposed after we jumped out of the plane together, got down to the ground and proposed. She wanted a travel destination wedding, and I said, whatever you want. So I just want to be married to you. You picked the time and place. And then my only stipulation was I want to be debt free. I want to follow this model. We followed the Dave Ramsey model of paying off all our debt, getting an emergency fund. So as soon as we got married, we combined our incomes, combined our debt, combined our savings, checking, everything, and said that this is what we're going after. We had that in the background, and that helped to kind of keep us in check with our spending. As soon as we got married, I got called up with the National Guard to deploy for a year to Kuwait. And so that was a tough decision to go along with, but it worked out, and it helped train us to work on our communication.
so we had kind of been through that. So we had, good communication going forward. And I was in grad school, so I was finishing up grad school when he was deployed. I am an occupational therapist, and so that was a busy time. We were kind of wanting to family plan, so we were lucky enough to give birth, and everything went well. And
during the pandemic, we had our son Maximus, which is an absolute joy.
Yeah, so he went into hospital when Max was about 7 months old. If you know Drew, he is very go-getter, he is very goal-oriented, so he was working full-time and also going to grad school. And so, he had been busy, and so we kind of just chalked it up as something, you're kind of overworking yourself, you're probably overtired.
What happened was, it was in May 2021. I started to get numbness, tingling in my arms, but it was kind of just like, let's put this away. I have grad school to think about, and it was around the time I'm turning in finals, as well as I'm working 40 hours a week in a tough sales job with quotas, and there was a lot going on, to say the least.
He started having increased tingling in his extremities, so his arms and his legs, and he just said, I don't feel good, this doesn't feel right, I don't know what's going on,
And it just happened one afternoon where I didn't feel well. I was laying down, just kind of resting, and I got up and I said, Krista, you need to take me to the emergency room. I'm not one to go to the hospital often or anything. It takes a lot for me to go to the hospital, but I knew at my core something was wrong and I didn't have an answer for it. And so it felt like I couldn't move it took a lot to move my hands and feet. So it's like they were strapped with concrete type feeling. And they ran every test that they could have. So it was MRI, it was CAT scan, blood work, temperature, everything you can think of. And this was around when COVID was very bad. And so all of it comes back negative. I was in the hospital for about 3 hours, negative on everything. I was sitting there feeling kind of strange. Doctor comes in and says, you have Guillain-Barre Syndrome.
So Guillain-Barre, GBS, is a rare autoimmune disorder. And essentially, your immune system is attacking your nerves, and so they're just shredded to pieces, and it causes paralysis.
And so this sounded really bad, and I didn't believe it. I'm like, well, for one, prove it. Show me some. And she said, well, we don't have anything to go off of. The next step is to do a spinal tap.
But they wanted to do a spinal tap, and he said, no, I have some papers I need to do. I have some other things I need to get done before we kind of really go down this road of trying to figure out what exactly is wrong with me. So we ended up going home that evening, and then the next morning he woke up and was like, I can't move. He had to go to the bathroom, and we didn't have like a wheelchair or anything, so I had to drag him in a folding chair into the bathroom, and he couldn't even sit down on the toilet, like he plopped. And then we had to figure out how to get down the stairs and into this car, and I'm basically carrying him.
I can still use my feet and my hands. So in the car, I'm on Outlook for my school, emailing my 3 professors saying, hey, I'm going to the hospital. I'm on my work phone, I'm sending my clients texts, I'm sending messages to my manager saying, I'm going to the hospital. I got clients, I'd message them, and she'd just like, just feel better. And then I get there, I sit in the wheelchair, I lay down in the bed, and I say, do whatever you gotta do. Now it's like, let go. There's nothing more I can do. Now it's for the experts. They took me by ambulance, and I barely remember anything in the ambulance. I remember just laying there, and I remember the bumps. A lot of that area is just a lot of blurriness.
I mean, doctors are in and out, and things are happening rapidly, so.
The next thing I remember is doctors talking to me, and Krista was on my left side, and both of them saying, we need to put you into an induced coma, self-induced coma. I'm like, okay, you want me to make this decision? I don't know what's going on. And so my immediate response was, I need to call my parents, I need to call my mom and Krista's parents and saying, I'm going into a coma. That's all I know. This is what the doctors say, and this is what needs to happen.
He could kind of barely speak. He barely just said, I love you, and that was pretty much all he could say.
So it could have been the last phone call, and it was just a lot of hand holding, a lot of hugging. But I guess I didn't stay with the being scared moment. I felt it, acknowledged it, and now it's like, what do we need to do? Let's get going. Let's do the thing. Once the doctor said we're ready to go, then that's where we went.
And so it was rush after that. The doctors ran in right after that, and he couldn't communicate. He was out for about, I want to say 7 days, really sedated. They tried weaning him off some of the medications to try to wake him up, but it's hard because he couldn't speak. He had tubes coming out of his nose, his mouth, everything. They had to put a peg in, which is something they put in your stomach directly so you can get nutrients. They did plasmapheresis, which is basically taking your blood and cleaning it and then putting it back in. So, and I remember that was him saying that was part of his coma dream, that he could feel it. He could feel the treatment happening to him, but he couldn't do anything about it. It was very out of it, didn't know what was going on, so.
While I was in the coma, it was like a dream, and yeah, it was the most intense dream I've ever had, and it did shift the way I look at life in more of a balance as well, of being grateful for everything that I have, everything that I will have, and still striving to keep going.
And he was at that point coming out of a coma dream, which is pretty vivid and pretty intense. His eyes were wide, like, is this real? What's happening? What's going on? Type of thing. So he was really confused. I remember when he woke up, he could really only communicate with his eyes. He was in a lot of pain too, and so they were trying to manage his pain pretty well, so he was on a lot of drugs.
But then the next thing I remember was waking up in what felt like good company. My wife was there, doctors, and at this point I was in complete paralysis. I couldn't do anything. I believe at this time I couldn't even talk. So it was a lot of grumbling, but at the same time I couldn't feel anything with my body. So that part was scary. I guess that was more scary to me at the time. Just knowing, okay, is this how I'm gonna live?
He was paralyzed from pretty much the neck down suddenly. It was really sudden. It was within a matter of a week.
I just remember they were telling me to wiggle my toes, and then I couldn't do it. And then another doctor would come in a couple hours later, or it felt like a revolving door. And the more they asked, the more I realized that I couldn't do it. They were not moving, and not without me trying. I was telling my brain, I was telling my toes to do it, and it wasn't happening. There was just nothing going on. I was just laying there.
The first month was really difficult because I was there for 8 hours a day. I was really disoriented. We got a lot of support from friends and family throughout this whole process.
At first I'm like, keep a lid on this. This is just something that's affecting me. I'm gonna get back and nobody's gonna know at all what happened. As it progressed, all right, include another layer of people, close friends, acquaintances. So they've all been asking and wondering, and what is Guillain-Barre and how are you doing? So a lot of questions, a lot of support came back while I was just laying there.
People are always asking, how can we help? What can we do? And so I was like, okay, my task throughout that period was to kind of figure out, okay, what can people do? Because there's gonna be a lot of people that wanna help us. But I wanna be thoughtful about this, and I want to make sure that we are including everyone that wants to be included in this process with us, because it was a big deal. We've been really trying to personally thank everyone since then, and really trying to share our journey. And this is kind of one of the things that we wanted to do, is to really thank everyone for helping out. There's really no way we could have gotten through it without them. So.
My shoulders started to come back first, that I remember, my neck and shoulders. And when I say coming back, I was able to move them. And so it's just very small movements.
He had to swallow study, which caused him to aspirate and caused pneumonia. So that was kind of a step back.
I was freezing cold. They're adding heated blankets onto me at the same time that they're trying to figure out where to send me.
And then he was transferred to the ICU for about a week, and then another step-down unit. So we were kind of being moved around a lot. So the talk was to go to like a long-term care facility first.
So then I came up with the idea, I'm like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? I'm a veteran. I know that I could be at the VA. I told my wife, I'm like, VA, or however that communication was. At that point, I don't know if I was talking or not. I was in the VA within a day or so. All that they needed was a negative COVID test. Then I'd be in quarantine for, first it was 2 weeks. So I'm like, whatever, like no visitors. Luckily when I got there, they switched the COVID rules to 1 week. So I had to spend 7 days alone. And at that point, like I said, my shoulders were opening up. As soon as I became unparalyzed, it was a great thing because it meant I could move my body again, but it turned me into unbelievable nerve pain in that area. So it was constantly firing. Think of like electricity.
When all of that sensation was coming back, it was very painful for him.
Nobody could come to the hospital, even my mother, even Chris's parents that we're so close to. That was the hardest part of this whole process. Max was 5 months old when I went in, and there wasn't a moment that went by that I didn't think about him. So that was the most painful thing mentally, was not seeing my son. Still at this time, this was July, so about 2 months away from him. And then it's like, okay, what's next? And when can I go, when can I hold my son again? When can I see my son?
Self-care was kind of out the window. I wasn't really talking to friends a lot, wasn't really communicating, wasn't going out. Because I felt like every time that I went out, I felt really guilty that Drew was stuck staring at the ceiling and I was out trying to enjoy my time, and that really didn't sit well with me. So I wanted to spend a lot of time with Max too, because Drew wasn't able to see him. So I wanted to kind of be two parents in that sense. So that was really hard. There was a lot of trauma that went along with that.
We had an emergency fund of about 4 months at the time. So while my wife sat next to me in the hospital, she didn't have to worry about paying the electrical bill. It was already on automatic payment.
Having a plan in place for when things don't go right is really important.
Basically, she could sit there with me and only worry about the major things that were happening in my body, in my mind, and not about the cable bill. I could go on forever about the amount of support that we had from organizations. Wound Award Project that I'm a volunteer with. They came in, they supported me, wrote me letters.
We did a GoFundMe, so our friends were really instrumental in kind of helping with that, because I was out of work, and when I don't work, I don't get paid. So So that was a really big hit for us too. So the GoFundMe and the outside organizations that kind of stepped in to sort of help us with finances was instrumental as well.
I started to ask doctors and nurses, when can I go home? When is this gonna be better? When can I get my arms back? Like, I was asking very specific questions, and it came back one of two ways. It was either, it depends, because Guillain-Barre affects less than 20,000 people a year, so there's not a lot of studies on it. The second thing was a long medical answer. Whether I was in a tough spot mentally at the time or not, I started to veer off as soon as they threw medical terminology and definitions. So I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I was gonna be back. I don't know if I could hold my son again. Moved on to being on the first floor of the VA, and I could see outside. I could see real people walking on a sidewalk, and it was the most amazing feeling because I could turn my head and see it. Keep in mind, turning my head caused extreme amount of nerve pain, but it was worth it. Another unusual thing, there were turkeys just walking right outside my window at the Minneapolis VA, so that was a interesting feel. Somebody would come in and be like, "You got turkeys outside your window?" I'm like, "Yeah, they're my pets, my zoo right there." The positive things started to accumulate, and I just had to notice them. It was hard to notice them, but they were there. And so I had to think about this, looking at the turkeys, the nurses' smiling faces, little things like that. My wife would come in, and I'd be grateful that she was there only for that 2 hours.
And that just kind of begins the process of his recovery.
That's a good time to say I was in recovery. We got to the spot where I could have therapies. So that was a moment that we were all trying to get to, but it just took 2 months to get there. I had physical therapists and occupational therapists at that time had to come into my room. I couldn't leave the room, but they said they'd work on my arms and my legs, and at this time was when other places started to open up. My chest, my stomach. They say that Guillain-Barre comes in your toes, up, and then out. But it's a matter of how long that takes and what you have to go through. My upper arm started to open up, and I'm like, okay, that's great. I can move them. And it was a lot of like lifts like this, and just the most important thing I could say is, as it opened up, I realized that I was no longer paralyzed in that area, but it caused the most extreme nerve pain, and it didn't go away. It stayed there, and it stayed there. It was the most painful at night. Without medication to make me go to sleep, I would not sleep. I'd stay up, and this is moving medication doses up and down. They need my feedback all the time. What level of pain are you in? Out of 10, and it was often 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10. Like, it's one of the things where I can't even explain and to make somebody relate to it, other than being electrocuted, just hooked up to a million cords. So I remember that. I didn't have an end date of when I was allowed to leave. I wanted to know that every single day. I wanted to know when I could leave. We could have people come up to the window of glad I was on the first floor, come up to the window.
We were allowed to visit him outside of his window. So he was luckily on like a main floor where he had big windows. He could look out onto the beautiful grounds. And
instead of turning my head, I think, which I couldn't really do too well at the time, they turned my whole hospital bed. My wife was in the room with me, holding my hand, and my in-laws were at the window with my son, Maximus.
He hadn't seen Max. He hadn't seen him in a month. I mean, I don't even think we FaceTimed really too much while he was in the hospital, because he was in so much pain and just in and out. So for a whole entire month, he hadn't seen him.
And he says, "Dad," and it was his first word. So yeah, that was.
We were fortunate enough, Drew was able to see Max, and actually that was when Max said his first words. His first words were "Dada." So that was a really cool moment for all of us. So
that was another indicator that it gave me hope. What do I need to do to get out of here? My occupational therapist gave me a list of exercises, but it was practicing raising my arm. So I'm sure it was a lot like this. I think it was like that. So it was a lot of, I could do this part. So she said, do that 20 times. I did more than that, and it was painful, and I didn't want to do it. Whenever I could and I had the strength, I would be doing 40 of these. And that got me to the next step, I was able to go out of the hospital room. So they gave me I had to be in a powered wheelchair.
They had to have, the oxygen on him, and he had to be in a specialized wheelchair with all these other gadgets and things. So it was a lot of work to get him to be sitting up.
Getting out of the room was a huge thing. I wanted to do that, but also I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to explain what was going on, I guess. I didn't want to acknowledge there was partying. I still didn't want to acknowledge that this was a real thing that was going on.
He didn't want people to see him in that state. He didn't know how people would react.
Some of the best points were when my friends and family came in to visit. My best man at my wedding, he would come over there and we would play poker or cribbage, and he wouldn't ask me about what was going on with me unless I brought it up. And so that was the coolest feeling, where he treated me like nothing was wrong with me. And I can't explain it any more than that, but just being treated like a regular human meant so much to me. Knowing that somebody could treat me like that, not wanting to help, not feeling bad for me. Yeah, just as an equal. I found out that there's, at least in my opinion, during that time, there were two different types of crying. When it was painful tears, it would run down, usually just the side of my eye. I'd be laying there and tears would just come down because of pain. But I noticed when I was thinking about my son, my wife, my close friends, my in-laws, anything like that, and the real connection, it was the inner eye. And then it would just be, waterworks. At that point, it was, okay, I gotta be getting close. When can I go home? And then my primary care provider came in and said, all right, we're thinking about having you home about November time. And I looked at her with as much confidence and patience, or whatever you want to say, and said, it is my intent to be home for my son's birthday on October 1st. She's like, I think we can make that work, but it will require some effort on your end. I said, I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. And whatever they said is like, we're projecting this. I'm like, tactically, is there a way I can do this faster, but still in a safe way? That's when I turned my questions around between when can I go home to what would have to be true so I can breathe on my own. And then we worked on that, and that got me closer and closer.
And as the weather got warmer, he was able to go outside, which was really, really great for him. He was able to use his power wheelchair to go outside and visit with friends and family, and he was able to visit with Max too.
So the day was coming closer and closer, and I became more excited, more driven. That one was for you, Max. Can't wait to see you. Happy first birthday. And then my primary doctor comes in and says, would you like to go home a little bit early, a week early? And I'm like, yes. So we did that. So I left with a cane, AFOs on my legs, a rollator, which is a walker with wheels, all these devices to walk. I want to just ditch all of them, but I do need them. So we're trying to prepare as much as possible, but you're never going to be ready. The day came, and I was able to come home on September 24th. I was there for my son's first birthday, and in my mind, I'm like, we're gonna have a coming home party because people are asking about it. We're gonna have his first birthday. It's gonna be huge. But it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I wasn't able to do all that. In my mind, I thought I can, which is a good and bad thing. But my wife, she tends to be that Wonder Woman that throws a lasso around me if I were Superman, and kind of pulls in the reins and be like, all right, come back down to earth for a little bit. And so we had a small get together for his first birthday with family, and it was incredible. It was everything it needed to be.
So he was let out in September, and then Max's first birthday, and I wanted to, be a caregiver for him.
Instead of constant electrical, fire, nerve pain, I'm now trapped in a body where I can't do much throughout the day. Need to be supervised. I try to avoid that as much as possible and do as much on my own. Going to the bathroom alone was a huge thing for me once I got home. Taking a shower by myself. Like I had a body that I did a lot with, and when I was in the hospital, take care of me. But once I was home, I was home. I wanted to be that person.
He's still dealing with a lot of residual challenges.
I still need physical therapy, occupational therapy.
Each time that I've done that with Drew, he's shown statistically significant improvements in those features. And it's really fun in the pool. Right now, he's doing the pool once a week and can do a ton of stuff. We're walking at 2.5 miles per hour without holding on to anything. That's great. He uses a cane out in the community. He's been motivated and pushing through those things. Managing fatigue at the same time as onset of Guillain-Barre. He had a new baby, and now he's getting back to work. So it's a lot of confounding factors that he's having to battle, and he's just pushing right through it. And it's been great to see.
But I know his main goal coming out of the hospital was to be able to hold Max, and he's accomplishing that. So that was really big for us, for him to be able to do the things that he wanted to do for so long while he was in the hospital.
When I didn't have anything, when I didn't have anybody in the hospital at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., I'm wide awake and in pain. So I laid there and I'm looking at the ceiling. It's got tiles, different types of large tiles. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna start my business plan. I don't even call it a business plan at the moment. It's just a to-do list. And that turned into a business. Last month, I launched the LLC. So now it's real. It's out in the universe. And now I have one client.
So we're kind of stepping out of the survival mode and stepping into, okay, what's the next step for us? What's the next step for our family? What's the next step for us as a couple?
I would like to connect with as many other people who have survived Guillain-Barre Syndrome or have family members of people who have had Guillain-Barre. So that is one goal that's very important to me going forward from this. Is I'd love to hear other people's recovery stories. I'm going to do whatever I can with the resources I have to make the biggest difference.